Good morning, everyone. Hi to all. It's a great pleasure for me to chair this session on soft robotics and also to introduce our colleagues for outstanding keynote speakers that will share with us their vision and work in these two fascinating fields. I am Barbara Mazzolai, Associate Director for Robotics at the Italian Institute of Technology. And I would like to start by briefly defining soft robotics. So soft robots are machines that can actively and gently interact with the environment by deforming their bodies and behaviors. And what is very important for these robots are their compliance and variable stiffness in order to apply force and to interact with the environment, but also an embodied perception and computation that is distributed into their bodies. So soft robotics is intrinsically interdisciplinary, is deeply based on bioinspiration, and it's a rapidly growing field with an interest that is across science and technology. So the goal is merging basic science and applied research. And so what is our approach is orchestrating materials, body structure, sensing, actuation, control to enable adaptive morphology and behavior, as I mentioned before, but also open up new application scenarios. And so our community is addressing several scientific technological challenges, such as improve the body control and co-design, but also to propose solutions that are more sustainable, more integrated into natural environments. And so this is some of the points, much more that our speakers will discuss in their presentations. So we have four excellent speakers. So the first is Robert Katzschmann. He's assistant professor of robotics at ETH in Zurich. And his interest is in proposing and developing lifelike machines and even biohybrid systems in order to improve the abilities of soft robots. Second speaker is Hugo Rodriguez, associate professor at the Sungkyunkwan University in Korea, and his research focusing in improving the performance of soft actuators, in particular pneumatic actuators, to improve the ability and also the usability of such robots and consequently the impact in a real environment. After that, Cynthia Sang, she's associate professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and she's an expert in developing origami-inspired structures, but also in the computational design, fabrication of soft robots in order to improve the interaction, making more fluid the interaction robots with the environment, even in a structured environment. Last but not least, Wenzhen Yang, associate professor at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. She's an expert in tactile sensors. The goal is to improve the perception capability of our soft robots to improve the interaction with the human, but also with the environment. So no doubts that they will inspire us with their vision, with their work. So please join me in giving them a warm welcome, and we can start with the first speaker, Robert Katzschmann.
I'm looking forward to talk a bit about musculoskeletal robots and biohybrid systems. So what you see here is a YouTuber that manages to get millions of people excited about what he does every single day, which is to assemble food at McDonald's. And I find this extremely exciting because we cannot build robots that can do anything like this. We also don't have robots that can actually clean up our room, clean the mess and the unstructuredness of our world. So we've been asking, in the context of understanding what it means to actually do soft robotics research, we've been looking into trying to understand how can we tackle this world and grasp in this world. So one of the recent things we started doing is to start poking at things and literally like take objects that are deformable, such as a cube or other items, and then trying to really scan in high resolution, understanding how can we actually build up a data set that allows us to get all the information about the deformability and about the interaction of these objects in the real world. So we're trying to understand, can we actually make a data set that can be loaded into your favorite simulator, and you could start using this to actually, let's take any object that you're curious to interact with, and it's not rigid anymore, but it's deformable. How can we make use of this? And so you can start studying a lot of different ways of like looking at material parameters for these objects. So for example, here, there's the same sort of little octopus pluche, and we have our mesh from our high resolution data capture, and now we're starting trying to understand what's actually the material parameters of this. But, so now, taking a step further, if we want to now grasp these objects, will it be at McDonald's, or will it be in our home? Can we just use simple crippers? Well, we've been trying to do this for a few years now. So we've, for example, been taking single two crippers with motors on them and deformable structures and trying to use them to, for example, pick items from the air. And it works quite well, and the simplicity in the grasping actually allows you to simplify your approach a lot, so we can quickly pick up items, we can fly outside here, we put a vision stack on top and to do this manipulation. If you want to learn more about this, come later to our talk at this morning at 11:25, and Mark will tell you more about this work. But really the question is, can we clean up the room with these simple crippers? Well, Physical Intelligence, a company from San Francisco, is trying to do exactly this. They're trying to use simple crippers, 2 of them, and they're trying to clean up our room. And what I'm trying to say here is it's not really quite there yet to do things at McDonald's or more complicated things, I would say. So we take inspiration from soft robotics. In soft robotics, we do have various developments in cripping, in underwater locomotion, also in locomotion on land and even for flying. And in all of these technologies, we're trying to find the right combination of softness and rigidity. And we at ETH Zurich, we're trying to think, can we really use these soft robotic technologies? Can we couple them with what we know from rigid robots? And can we also take the inspiration from nature to build robots that combine the best of these 3 worlds? And we call them musculoskeletal robots because they have a skeleton, but they also have muscles to them. So this is how we're going to tackle this, and this is going to be basically the key things I will cover today in this short keynote. Is first of all, I want to tell you a bit about how we're looking into biohybrid muscles and how we use them. It's a combination of engineered skeletons, which are not living, and living muscles that we place into these skeletons. Then we also look into how we can make non-living muscles, but they may also allow us to build systems that are more compliant and better to interact with this world. All the way to building the complexity of musculoskeletal systems through 3D printing, and how can we give these systems autonomy and make them dexterous. So usually I like to say there's all these elements that we can take inspiration from in our human body, or in any animal for that matter. And the one key thing among all of these building blocks is the muscle. The muscle really makes the difference here. Without the muscle, we can't move these robots. And by muscle, I don't just mean a motor. It has to be more than this. So one of the things that we've been doing is we've been trying to build these muscles from cells. And here we're using a technique that's called xolography, and this technique allows you to print different scaffolds with fine grooves to them, and then we can place cells into these. These are immortalized cell lines from a mouse, and then couple these into these scaffolds with these seeded cells. So what we get in the end is we have this combination of myoplasts that we start maturing from day 0 on, and we get this remodeling of these structures, and after 14 days, we actually get a myofiber out of this. So it looks like this. We have this swimmer, it has this myofiber that's here shown in white, and this is swimming in real time in a liquid. And now, what do you think is going to happen if I greedily keep increasing the stimulus that I give to this muscle? Any idea? Well, it will start sort of like cramping up. If I go beyond these 5 Hz actuation, I will actually see that this muscle will not be able to anymore swim because I actually exceeded the ability of the calcium channels to open and the biological muscle to function the way it's supposed to. We could do other stuff. We can, for example, do jumping. We can do walking. We can also do, for example, frequency-dependent upward swimming, and we can look at how well we can swim upwards at different frequencies with these swimmers, and use these constructs in different combinations. So we're trying to figure out how we can actually make these a controllable system. But we're still, I would say, a long way away from using these kind of systems for building a full leg or a full hand for that matter. And I mean, I was teasing at this, and I want to get to that result faster, so we cannot wait for the development in biology to make progress on this. So we also shifted a bit towards the question of, can we instead, for example, make these electrohydraulic muscles? What does it mean to make electrohydraulic muscles? Well, essentially, we use a technology that was developed at UC Boulder by Professor Keplinger, and we're building on top of this idea of making flexible capacitors that have liquid in them. And what we really want to show here is we want to make a comparison between what you traditionally know as an electromagnetically driven system, where you have multiple motors in a design, and you would have, let's say, an encoder in this design, you could have a gearbox in there, it could be a direct drive, but this is the typical electromagnetic system. And we wanted to compare this to a system that uses these Hazel technologies in large packs. So we have many of these Hazel packs combined into antagonistic groups of muscles and then attached by tendons to your structure. And we can do also self-sensing with these units. And what we can basically do is we can say, okay, we can take these electromagnetic motors and now replace them with a contractive muscle. So basically, I don't have anymore a unit that just rotates and produces forces, but instead I have a unit that can contract and also inherently have the ability to be compliant. The same thing is that I don't necessarily need to use an encoder. I can replace this encoder, which typically lives in the joint of our robot design, and instead I just sense directly in the muscle my contraction amount. So how much force am I applying, or how much external disturbance am I taking up? And similarly, I also can take the idea of not needing to use a linear transmission anymore, which would basically mean I don't need to use gearboxes, planetary gear sets necessarily. I can instead just take my muscles and attach them with multiple tendons wherever I need to my skeleton. So then I suddenly also have the ability to design my joints in a more free way. I don't have the motor anymore in the joints. I have the muscles packed around my skeleton. So here is an example of how this thing can jump. So you basically have a multitude of these different muscles, and it goes over our little fake garden environment. And so here we started working on just getting one single leg to work. Another thing we looked at is energy efficiency. Like on the left side, you see with a thermal camera how a DC motor naturally just heats up over time. And as I keep actuating it, this thing gets just very hot. Our muscles using a Hazel system do not heat up. This system is actually just low temperature the whole time. We don't have the same amount of losses because we mostly just produce a holding force by not moving any charges around. Another thing we can do is we can also do closed loop control. So I can have this thing run against an obstacle, and it changes the capacitance. And from this, I can learn, okay, I have a change in capacitance, and this change detected tells me to change my policy of how I jump over my terrain. One problem with Hazels is, though, that we still have not figured out how to make them also extensible. So they are not really stretchable beyond their natural length. So one thing we've been working on is, can we now, instead of having just a pure muscle with tendon, which gives you a limited motion range, can we couple this with clutches, so you have a muscle with a clutch, both of them relying on electrostatic effects, and get a much larger motion range? If you're curious about this, come to our talk today at 10 o'clock. So it's not only muscles, it's also all the other elements that we need to build to actually achieve this goal of building musculoskeletal systems. So one thing that we looked into is, can we, for example, do this by, instead of using just traditional fabrication techniques, can we print it all in one shot? Could we build a heart, a hand, a walker, all in a single technique? And for this, we've developed a system called vision-controlled jetting. With vision-controlled jetting, we can now contact-free deposit droplets of functional materials. And so we can say, okay, I take a hand, I slice it up. This hand has all the different features that I'm curious about to replicate. It was actually a scan of a human. Everything that you see in terms of the skeleton was a human hand scanned in. And then we print layer by layer, and in every single layer we scan the surface and we find the unevenness, and then we compensate for the unevenness in the next layer. And this way we can now start using very different types of polymer technologies. So we can, for example, make a walker with all of its cavities to it. We can make hands with its capsules and its tendons and its ligaments. And then we can make these things actually articulated and make them move. So this is a pneumatic walker that's trying to find its box here. And you can also make a hand that can be articulated in the same way. But can we also, now taking these hand technologies that we developed, can we actually learn from humans and make something out of this? So yes, we can, and I will show you how. So here is sort of like one of the iterations of a hand going into the McDonald's setup. So we got quite excited after we started printing the first prototypes of these hands. We started also making many, many iterations of robotic hands and trying to understand how we can couple tendon actuation, ligaments, and so forth into these designs. And we've now been at this point where we're actually starting to do a lot more in the direction of imitation learning. So we're using these units to, for example, manipulate objects or to close boxes and to teleoperate these systems. And we also released now a system called the Orca hand, which is an open source design that you can just reproduce with all of the instructions of how to make it. And you can use it for reinforcement learning, or you can use it for imitation learning. And we've also been looking into giving these systems the ability to now, let's say, for example, grasp up a brush here. And we use an Ego 4D pre-encoder to actually understand what's happening here and give this hand the ability to succeed in these tasks. Mimic is one of the spin-offs in Zurich from our lab that actually has started to commercialize these ideas. And they're interested in doing, for example, automated tray picking. So using this hand to automatically pick up objects and put them from a tray into another tray. So I've only gotten 12 minutes today, so that was a little bit of a glimpse to wrap it up. I showed you a bit about the Biohybrid technologies and only get you like a little insight of what we're doing. We're building many more different muscle technologies. We're also looking into building systems from this, and we also have printed and we've also built dexterous autonomy algorithms for these systems. In the future, we will have to make muscle integration really happening on all of these systems even further, show that we can do fine dexterity with these, that we can do cross-embodiment policies, do proprioception, true real-world autonomy. We've already started doing this, as I showed to you, and then eventually also do better human collaboration. I then open for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Great. So questions for Robert? Yes, please. There is the microphone there.
So thanks for the inspiring talk, Robert. I would like to ask about the sensing aspect of the electrohydraulic muscle. Like I assume you use the capacitance sensing to measure the length. I wonder how accurate it is compared to using encoder for motor. How accurate you can control the electrohydraulic muscle for position control.
Well, the beauty is in that I think the major challenge is not so much about accuracy, but we did use it, for example, to just a closed loop end effector control. So we can run it, and also we can still use encoders. Like, I'm not trying to say you don't need to use encoders. We coupled both the capacitive sensing with encoders together, and we were able to, for example, do trajectory following of different types of trajectories fairly accurately. I think it's a nice coupling. The capacitive sensing is sort of our way of getting a coarser way of understanding, there is a force disturbing our system and we can act on it. We still have more work to do to then directly translate this by itself alone into a precise motion. The encoder already gives us this in the joints. So this is still open work, but I think it's normal that with a compliant system that you have to also be okay with maybe sometimes less precision.
Okay, maybe a quick follow-up question. So when it's like zipped, right, like you cannot sense the capacitance anymore. Is that true, or like you can only sense the capacitance when it's like unactuated for the electrohydraulic muscle?
I'm not sure if I understood your question. Can you say this again? Sorry.
So basically, like you use high voltage to zip the back, right, like for electrohydraulic muscle. So I wonder, like, are you using the electrode to measure the capacitance when it's unzipped? Like when it's zipped, because it's clamped together, is there like...
So we have two approaches for this. In one way, we're actually using the same electrode that we use for actuation to also sense the capacitance of that high voltage electrode. In another work, we actually showed that we can have two separate electrodes, one on the one side of the hazel and the other on the other side of the hazel. And one of them is the low voltage, purely sensing electrode. That's sort of like when you zip together, the other one will expand, and then you read out the state from that.
Oh, that's smart. Thank you.
Question?
Thank you for the talk. I was interested in the soft hands and the load capacity of them, because inherently an issue with soft grippers, very low load capacity, and as you were showing the different designs throughout the years, you went to more traditional pin joints. So I was wondering, did you just find a fundamental limit in the load capacity, or do you think there's ways to compensate?
I mean, actually, no. We've been still continuously developing also rolling contact joint designs, not just pin joints. So we do that. We are interested in this evolution. We actually find a lot of load-bearing capacity with the rolling contact joint design, which is quite interesting. I would say the major challenge that we have with the rolling contact joint design is reading out the joint state accurately. So we're working on this. The reason why we've been also working on these pin joint designs is we can just very quickly read out the joint states until the point that we actually have placed the proper muscles into the system instead of motors.
And then for the initial hand you made back in 21, I believe,
yeah.
What was the load capacity of that?
It was maybe a few hundred grams of load capacity because we printed the tendons with the same system.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we thank again Robert.